Could the Brevard School Board have communicated or campaigned better before its failed sales tax vote? Did it listen well enough before closing schools? Nationally, can Florida Senator Marco Rubio communicate better with minorities to help rebrand the Republican Party? And across Central Florida, how did the recent onslaught of negative political TV advertising affect you and your neighbors? Today, we tackle those questions with an expert on political communication. Dr. Heidi Hatfield-Edwards is Associate Professor and Chair of the Undergraduate Communication Program at the Florida Institute of Technology. I asked Dr. Edwards for her take on the local politics surrounding school closures. We'll start with a quick look back at the board's votes and public reaction.
We have taken every suggestion under consideration. We have laid it on our tables with our expert opinions here in the district, and we have reviewed every possible alternative situation. Okay, thank you. Dr. England?
Thank you, Dr. Murray. There are no...
Okay, then hearing no other comments, let's vote. Okay, thank you. The motion carries 3-2. Let's vote. The motion fails 2-3.
It's devastating.
Are you a teacher?
I'm a lead teacher, so Gardendale's what I've known my whole teaching career. So it's life-changing for me, for my family. Our school is a special place. The choice schools are modeled after our school. Our creator created those choice schools. This is devastating. We should be a feather in their cap.
What happens to you next?
Like getting right. Well, kids come first, resumes, and where we go second, I guess.
Dr. Edwards, one of the biggest political communication stories going on in Brevard County right now, it has to do with the schools, their budget cuts, and having to communicate with the public and navigate the whole process of closing schools and scaling back on education programs and the like. What do you make of what you've seen so far here in Brevard?
What I'm seeing with the schools and with the superintendent and the school board is that they're having a difficult time really communicating to the public about some of these issues. And I think one of the issues is that they're making very difficult decisions.
Right.
Right? And so with these difficult decisions, they're not really able to communicate with the public who have a different perspective on what the issues may be. And so connecting to them, one of the letters to the editor I read last week said that they're not listening to us, right? And so there's that perception, whether it's true or not, there's a perception that the school board just isn't listening to the folks who are trying to tell them, hey, these are the things that are important to us. And there are a lot of issues involved, and it is very complicated. But one of the things we talk about in strategic communication is this two-way communication. You do have to sit down and listen. What are the values that you're hearing from the folks who are in the public, and how do they relate to the decisions that you're making, and how can you relate those back to them? And so I think that's one of the difficulties that they're facing, and it's hard.
So even if you don't, in the end, agree with their political position, keep this school open or don't keep this school open, you still have to show at some level, repeat back to them what they've been telling you to indicate that you've listened, or what could they do a little bit differently or better, do you think?
Well, I think just taking a step back and identifying how are we responding to their issues. They may find, and one of the things that I teach in my classes is that you can't just say, okay, I'm going to listen to you, and then just go ahead and do whatever it is that you were going to do anyway.
Right.
You still have to have a dialogue, and you have to respond and not react, but respond to what is being said. You may still make the same decision, but how you make that decision and how you respond to the folks who are on the other side of that is an important aspect, and having them understand where you're coming from too.
So we're building our priorities together as a community and deciding what we want to do with our institutions.
Exactly, exactly. I saw that this week they're going to be, they're setting the priorities and having a series of meetings with about what those priorities are in terms of budget cuts, and not just about the school closing, but just generally budget cuts. And you know, identifying those priorities, I think they're doing a good thing in having these public meetings and identifying, you know, this is where we think they should be. Now, where is it that you think we should be? And having the community input on those things.
One of the issues in all of this was a proposed, I guess it was a sales tax increase that went to voters, and then it failed, and then they really strenuously listed the numbers or names of schools that they were going to close. And there's been some discussion about, well, you should have told us ahead of time which schools or not which schools. What do you think about that issue?
I think that was a serious downfall, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the backlash now, is that not just that here are the schools we're going to close, but that we're going to close several schools. That, you know, I'm not sure. That may have been said, but I'm not sure that message was actually, that reached the folks that they were sending it out to, and to the voters who are making those decisions at the polls about whether or not to pass that sales tax. And making sure that that message, you know, we're going to make spending cuts is a lot different than we're going to close schools. Right? And so making that very, very clear up front so that the voters really knew what was happening.
If people don't feel like they've been listened to at this point, and then in a year they go out with another sales tax, does that make it less likely that it's going to pass? Does that kind of impression affect the prospects in a year for that board initiative to raise a tax? Does it affect that?
I'm not sure if it's going to make a difference. I do know that if they do come back to the voters with this, that they've really got to start even now saying, you know what, this is a viable alternative, and get to the voters and get that message. You know, this is necessary, if it's necessary, right? And make that case to the voters. You know, making your case is the important factor here, and making sure that you're reaching those folks who are voting.
What's the best medium to do all this in 2013? You know, they had public meetings, a series of them around the county. I believe we did a couple of newspaper stories about the likelihood that there would be school closures. Is that enough? Do you have to also reach out in other ways?
You really do. You have to reach out with whatever medium you possibly can to reach the voters. You know, some studies that I've worked on, grassroots efforts are really important. Being able to just talk to people about it, right? And those meetings are very important. But you also have to use Facebook. You also have to use Twitter. You have to use the newspaper and television and radio. You really need to use whatever media is available to you to get the message out. And you have to identify who are your voters, who are the people who you need to reach, and where are they getting their news, where are they getting their messages, where are they going, you know, what forums are they using, and go to those places.
It really depends on their age, the age of the voter, and what medium they feel most comfortable with, it seems.
It very much so. You really do have to identify who's your target audience, and identify where can I reach those folks. And really, they've got to reach a pretty broad audiences, actually.
A quick update on the schools issue. After my interview with Dr. Edwards, a group of parents and community leaders filed a lawsuit alleging that the school closures will disproportionately affect minority students and should be stopped. Watch for more news on that in Florida Today. Next, I asked FIT's Heidi Edwards for her take on efforts by Senator Marco Rubio and other Republicans to reach out to minorities and strengthen support before the 2014 elections. Here's a look at Rubio's nationally televised Republican response to President Obama's State of the Union speech.
Like most Americans, for me, this ideal is personal. My parents immigrated here in pursuit of the opportunity to improve their life and to give their children the chance at an even better one. They made it to the middle class, my dad working as a bartender and my mother as a cashier and a maid. I didn't inherit any money from them. But I inherited something far better, the real opportunity to accomplish my dreams. This opportunity to make it to the middle class or beyond, no matter where you start out in life, it isn't bestowed on us from Washington. It comes from a vibrant free economy where people can risk their own money to open a business. And when they succeed, they hire more people who in turn invest or spend their money they make helping others start a business and create jobs. Presidents in both parties, from John F. Kennedy to Ronald Reagan, have known that our free enterprise economy is the source of our middle-class prosperity. But President Obama, he believes it's the cause of our problems. That the economic downturn happened because our government didn't tax enough, spend enough, or control enough.
Another political communication story that is big right now is the issue of the National Republican Party trying to rebrand itself. Marco Rubio, one of our U.S. senators here in Brevard County, gave the response to the President's State of the Union address. He obviously is trying to, in some ways, appeal to Latinos and others. What do you make of his effort or progress on that front?
Well, I think that he is trying really hard. What a coup to be able to give the response to the State of the Union address, and I think that's excellent. He is, you know, it's so silly. He had this wonderful speech that responded to a lot of different issues to the president's speech, but what do we remember?
We remember the water bottle.
Yes, yes.
Taking a sip.
I've heard it called Watergate and Gulpgate, or
right.
all of those things, right? So, and his response to that, I think, was very, very good. He got out and tweeted and made a joke of it himself, and you have to do that because that's going to come back, right?
Sure.
The issues that were involved, which, you know, and again, he touched on pretty much all of the issues. You know, those are going to be revisited and revisited, but not from his speech necessarily. He's going to talk about them, and as he has. Yet, we're going to see the water bottle.
Sure.
We're going to see that over and over again. And
one of the things that I've detected a little bit, and I covered the Republican National Convention in Tampa, was it seemed like the party believes that just by introducing Marco Rubio over and over and having him tell that story about being the son of a bartender and a maid and growing up in a community of Cuban, you know, people that are immigrants, that might be enough. That is going to appeal enough to Hispanic voters in Texas or California to help out and rebrand the party in some way. Is it enough? Do you see that working?
I think that today's voters are pretty savvy. You know, I'm not sure that it's going to be enough. You know, and he went through those challenges when about his parents coming over. Was it before or after? Mm-hmm. Right? And so the Cuban community knows that, right, in the Hispanic community. I think it's very important that he's reaching out to those areas and to those folks, but the Republican Party has to really decide who is its key constituency, and certainly reaching a lot of, you know, again, that broad base is important, but I find that they are very reactionary. And so the rebranding process has to start with, okay, what are our key values, right? And reaching out to those values to the different groups, like the Hispanic community. And I think Rubio is doing that, right? He's hitting those key value points. Right. I'm, you know, come from this this heritage, and so he's certainly hitting those. Will it be enough? It's hard to tell. Right.
How quickly can something like that happen? I mean, it seems like once your party has developed a real identity, or any corporation, I would imagine, has developed an identity, how quickly can you change what people think of it?
It takes a while. It takes a while. And I think the Republican Party has been so reactionary to different parts within the party that trying to figure out, okay, what is our foundation? What is our true foundation now? You know, we've got the Tea Party, right? And so, you know, are we going to be reactionary to the Tea Party or are we going to look at the party as a whole? And I think that's where they have to decide. It feels to me as if they've been very reactionary.
I have not noticed really either party in recent years doing something as simple as looking at the polls, seeing where a huge portion of people agree with your core belief, and campaign on those things, even if they're not the today's most polarizing or energetic issues, but really going out and making something like background checks on guys. Everybody agrees on background checks, so why not campaign on that? Or I just haven't seen that. Have you as much?
No, not really, and I think that's the political process. They're trying to find where we differ versus where we align, and that's, I think, in terms of the parties.
I see.
And so that's where you start getting the gridlock. When it's, and you know, we see folks who are trying on both sides to say, you know, let's get together, right? And let's work this out in a bipartisan way. But then you have the detractors who would say, yes, but we differ so much on these other things, and so we've lost a lot of that, I think, and from some of our, you know, earlier statesmen who were able to do that in a much more effective way.
Interesting. Well, you couldn't escape the negative political ads during the fall campaigns. My guest today, Dr. Heidi Edwards from FIT, has published research on its impact on voters. Remember ads like these from the U.S. Senate campaigns?
Obamacare will be a nightmare for Florida seniors. Did Bill Nelson consider the consequences when he cast a deciding vote for Obamacare?
This legislation is going to let folks that are happy with their insurance keep it.
Wrong. 20 million people could lose their current coverage. Out-of-state billionaires and special interests have spent over $20 million to buy Connie Mack IV a Senate seat. Is it any wonder? In Congress, Mack is protecting Chevron Oil from a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit over pollution of rivers and rainforests.
Let's talk about political advertising. You've done some research on the impacts and impressions of negative campaign advertising and soft money influence in campaigns. Boy, we just had a deluge of that during the last election season, especially here in Florida. What did your research find?
Our research looked at the soft money campaign ads, where we were looking at whether they were attacking, and these were attack ads, absolutely attack ads. Were they attacking the character or were they attacking the issue? And what we found in that was that if they were attacking the person, the person's character, then we were seeing that people, you know, we hate them, right? We hate these attack ads. We are so annoyed by them. If they were looking at character and saying, oh, Matt, you're just no good, right? Then we didn't like it, but we were not so cynical that we're not going to go to the polls.
Okay.
So we looked at cynicism and self-efficacy, or do I feel like I can make a difference? On the other hand, if I was attacking you because of a stance that you made on an issue.
Maybe Bill Nelson's vote on Obamacare or something, which was a big issue both this past election and before.
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of ad. So if we were attacking that, the more I saw that ad, then the more cynical I became, and the less I felt like I could do anything about it. So our research indicated that, you know, someone who is just being bombarded with those kinds of ads is probably not likely to go to the polls, actually.
Really?
Right, because they don't feel like they can do anything. They become less, more dissatisfied with the political process, even. Now, at the same time, we asked folks, well, what is your, how much are you affected by these ads?
Okay.
Right? And I'm not affected at all by those ads, right? I have my own opinions, and those ads are not going to affect me at all. But then we asked, so how much is your neighbor affected by these ads? Oh, Matt Reed, he's affected. He's really affected by these ads. And so one of the things that the implications that we found from that is that, you know, we have to be very careful about policy changes. Political advertising, political speech is our most protected speech, right?
Right.
And so when we start thinking, well, a lot of people are being affected by something, we're much more likely to want to see policy changes.
I see. So right now, they're doing a lot of soul searching in Washington and elsewhere. The Supreme Court's taking up issues, how much money should be involved. I know in Tallahassee, they're saying, should there be no limits on campaign contributions? And there's probably some belief that all this money is making a huge difference, but maybe it is or is not?
Well, we need to know more, right? We need to do the research and find out, is this, how is this impacting it? We can't just say, well, I think you're affected, but I'm not, right?
Right.
And make that our decision-making process. We have to find out, how is this impacting the political process, and look at a lot of the other issues in there.
How did you do this study? I mean, did you just survey people, sit them down and ask them questions in focus groups, or?
We actually did an experiment where we showed folks, and there were different groups, we showed folks different exposure levels of these advertisements.
Okay.
They were looking at either 1, 3, or 5 ads within the context of a news program.
Okay.
And so and they were looking at either issue-based ads or character-based ads, and of course we had a control group looking at that as well. And so, so it was really an interesting thing. Of course, these were hidden. We had the questions were embedded in a survey after they watched the news show, so they didn't really know what we were studying at the time. We told them afterward.
Okay.
But so we conducted this experiment. It was really interesting.
Why do you suppose there's a difference between the attack ad that goes after somebody's character and the attack ad that goes after somebody and their votes on a position? I would have guessed that going after somebody and their votes on a position is more civically engaging, that would make me less cynical, but it sounds like the actual reaction was different. It was the opposite.
It was the opposite, and I think part of that is that we're talking about 30-second ads.
Okay.
Right? And so you can't get at all the bigger parts of the issue in 30-second ads. And when you're looking at the issues from a broader perspective, then you might see something a little bit different. But if all you're getting are these 30-second little pieces, then you may see that happening.
Political communication isn't the only arena Dr. Edwards had researched. She is now turning her attention to video games. Since the school shooting in Connecticut earlier this year, politicians and pundits have blamed gaming for playing a role in real-world violence. You're now pushing into some new areas of research. Maybe you haven't completed the research itself yet, but it sounds like some of the questions are interesting. And one of those is video games. What are you trying to find out about video games?
Well, we're looking at video games and seeing how people interact with them and whether they become more isolated, whether they feel more isolated, why they engage in video gaming. And one of the concerns that pops up is that my child spends all his time in his room playing these video games, or my friend or whatever, and you get concerned about them, and so. And certainly that can happen, and I see it. I'm on a college campus, so
right.
Sometimes I see that. One of the things, though, that when talking to students, we did some preliminary focus groups on this, is looking at whether, are they really isolated? And one of the things that we're finding is, well, not necessarily, actually. I mean, that's sort of the stereotype, right? The kid in the dark corner.
Plays Call of Duty in his bedroom with the lights off for 4 hours, with a bowl of cereal over there or something.
Exactly. Hopefully there's a bowl of cereal over there. There have been cases in Korea and China where folks have been playing video games all night and have had some serious life-threatening health issues.
Wow.
Yes. So this is not, it's, when you talk about, gaming, well, in a sense, it's really not a game necessarily when it can be life-threatening.
Wow.
And so, but what we're finding, they are interacting with other folks, right? These are multiplayer games often, and while you can interact with people across the globe.
Sure.
You also can interact with the folks with you in the room, and so you have these gaming parties that people have, and so many of them find that it's a very, very social experience. It's not that isolating experience.
Interesting. Has there been research done on whether video games make people more violent or not? I know that was a question that came up after the shooting up in Connecticut.
Yes, and certainly there's a lot of research in how different media might affect folks, and really there is no evidence to suggest that playing a video game is going to make you go out and shoot someone, and that's I know that's a concern, and many of these video games are very, very violent, and but certain research does suggest some people, some of the time, may be affected. Most of us are not going to be affected in that way. What we have to look at are what are the other factors as well. Can violent video games be a factor? Probably. We don't have any concrete evidence that this is what caused it, but we do want to look at what other factors are involved. Was this person who is playing these violent video games already prone to violence, right? And so therefore they're getting that out. And there are those who argue, well, it's a cathartic kind of thing,
sure,
right? And so you have that. So yes, and it's certainly, I think it's always going to be an issue and something that we discuss.
Dr. Edwards, thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure, thank you.
Hope you got as much from that interview as I did. Remember, you can publish your feedback to anything you saw on this program or anything you read in Florida Today by sending an email to letters@floridatoday.com. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you right here next week on WBCC and FloridaToday.com.